Coming up on the Outside of Sunday podcast, we are talking with Siyanna Waru. Raised in a Christian home, Siyanna shares about being an analytical skeptic and going to Bible college to decide whether or not she actually wanted to be a Christian. In this episode, Siyanna shares her research on the subject of historical anti-Judaism as recorded in historical extra-biblical writings. Get ready to geek out in this episode of the Outside of Sunday podcast. Hey, you're listening to the Outside of Sunday podcast. Is your faith stuck on Sunday? Christianity was never meant to be constrained to a weekly church service. I'm Krista, and I'm here to help and encourage you to live your faith outside of Sunday. Welcome to this episode of the Outside of Sunday podcast. Today I have another very special guest. This is Siyanna Waru, and she is another one of my beautiful cousins. We just chatted with her sister recently, so it's a massive pleasure and privilege to have you here as well. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I know, we've been trying to do this for a little while, haven't we?
Yeah.
And now you're pregnant with number 3, baby.
Yeah.
So we were like, we got to get this done before you pop.
Yeah. Because that's coming up fast. Not fast enough, but fast.
Was it February?
February 27th.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But let's see, I'll walk around the lake a couple times and see if I can get that moving along sooner.
All right. Well, so obviously I know you very well as my cousin, but please tell the listeners just a little bit about who you are and about your studies as well, because that's why you're here today.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I'm a mum of 2.5. So, I mean, 3's on the way.
Yeah.
Loading.
Loading.
Yeah. So I'm a stay-at-home mum, but that, unfortunately, because I can't sit still, does not mean that all I do is parent. In between looking after my beautiful girls, I am working on a degree in biblical theology, majoring in the Old Testament.
Awesome.
And a separate degree working on biblical Hebrew.
Awesome.
And I have put a pause on just doing the papers for that for now because it's a lot of work, juggling study and children. But I will be resuming that after I finish my degree because I've only got 3 papers left.
Only 3 papers left.
Yeah.
And how long have you been doing the study
Since
for?
2019.
2019.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah. So it's been a long time.
Yeah.
But I've had to take it one paper at a time just to make it manageable with kids.
Yeah.
And when I'm not studying and when I'm not looking after children, I'm painting and drawing and doing little commissions.
You are an artiste.
Yeah. Yeah, I've only recently started doing that, so we'll see how that fits in when I resume studies for next year. Yeah, with
Awesome.
the 3rd baby.
Yay. So good. Yeah. Now, have you always been a Bible geek?
I've always been a geek. So, I don't know what it is. I'm not very good at enjoying something on like a surface level. I just want to go a little bit deeper.
Always got to go deeper.
Yeah, I just got to be a little bit more obsessed than the last person. I think, though, my geekiness around the Bible probably started when I was a kid. I was given, us 3 kids. I've got 2 siblings. We were given an illustration Bible. And I remember sitting on the floor and just looking at the pictures. I mean, I could half read, so I kind of got the gist of the story, but I just sit there and look at the pictures for ages.
Wow.
And I just remember almost transporting myself into the pictures and like living in the time of Jesus and like walking through the streets with him. That was my way of reading the Bible as a kid, I suppose.
Wow.
Then in high school, I went to a secular high school, and for a bit there I wouldn't say I wasn't Christian. I believed in God, but I wasn't really interested in following. Found it, I guess at that time, maybe too sacrificial of a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I was with secular friends, and I was like, so much easier to not be. But I kept having God encounters with friends from church because I was still going to youth group, but I was there for the games and the food.
The pizza.
And the pizza, and I think my heart was, I really did want to follow, but I was just so skeptical. I just had way too many questions and there were not enough answers. Not to the level that I thought. I mean, I loved my youth group, but it didn't have the depth that I think I was actually needing at that time. I think sometimes we think teenagers are dumb.
Yeah.
And they're not.
I feel like they want to know that stuff.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was really struggling to understand, like, why did Jesus die on the cross? Like, I know he had too, but no one was explaining the mechanics of that. And I mean, being really, I guess I'm quite a clinical thinker, like methodical, a little bit like a robot. Try not to be. So when things were just explained as like,
just because
it inspires beauty, like just when it's too holistic, I'm like, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
So after I had finished high school and after I've left youth group, I decided after a gap year that I was going to go to Bible college to see if I wanted to be Christian or not.
Wow, interesting. That's and usually you think you've already decided you want to be a Christian, you want to go into ministry, and then you go to Bible college.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way that you did that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't all one way or the other. Like, I wasn't all the way Christian, but there was something in Christianity that inspired me to pursue others with faith and to do it. I wanted to know Jesus better. I really, really did. I just wasn't getting it. And I found that really disheartening. But it was also so alluring to become secular because it means I didn't have to ask those hard questions. It didn't have to mean that I had to wrestle with identity and faith and all of that. So I decided I was just going to jump in with both feet. Luckily, it worked out fantastic because I was just blown away by the lecturers that I had. One particular, Shirley Carpenter, she's a doctor in hermeneutics. She just opened up the Bible for me in a way that just, honestly, I felt like I had just been dropped in the middle of the ocean, and I'm like, I could swim for years in the questions and the answers. It fully blew me away, and I just fell in love with Jesus and with the Word again. Like, so that was my watershed moment when I went to Bible college. And there was definitely hard times being quite, I can be quite, cynical around how I think about things, especially when it gets a little bit too airy-fairy.
I suppose, and there's that thing, there are so many answers that are available if you have, I suppose that drive to find the answers.
Totally.
But also, there are going to be times where you won't have the answers and where things are looking not great for Christianity, and you're like, am I going to choose just to, okay, I've come this far, now I'm going to bail because I've come up to some resistance here, either mentally or emotionally or whatever it could be. And it's like, you do have that point where it's just like, am I going to wait this out? Am I going to have trust God and in his goodness enough to, okay, let's just see. And maybe the answer will come in like 5 years or so, like exactly. Sometimes that's how it is.
Totally. And I think that's the wrestle, right? You're supposed to try and test the word with God. You do it's like a dance, I suppose. You go back and forth with things, and sometimes you have to put it down and pick up something else and come back to it. And it is sometimes like a year's long journey. Like there's some things that I'm still studying now that I haven't even touched the edges of. But my time in Bible college was just, it changed my life, and I'm just so thankful that God put Shirley Carpenter in my path because she just inspired me to take the line of biblical studies and just run for it. And I have since then. I'm
a little bit of a Bible geek as well, definitely not as academic as you are, but I was not gifted. I did not do well in high school or anything like that, but now I would never be like, let me do some study because I love to study. I just did not love to study. But now I just love to study the Bible. Like, I just think it's the most fascinating, most amazing book. I mean, it is. And also just knowing more about who Jesus is and the Lord. And
totally. And the thing is, I'm not academic at all.
No,
I mean it the best way. I'm very dyslexic. I struggle to read. I struggle to write. But I think God's just made me passionate about it, and so which means I just drive a little bit harder to get to the I guess, like, say with the academic markings and stuff like that, I'll pass. And I'm passing much better than I had when I began, and my grades are going up because I'm learning. But it's not something that I'm naturally gifted at. It's just something that I'm incredibly drawn to. I just can't help but question and want to pursue.
That's awesome. And God obviously placed that within you as well. Now, you recently wrote a paper on Anti-Judaism. What initially motivated you to write that paper? Because that's kind of what we're here to talk about today.
So it was actually a module that we were doing in my paper this year. We were studying Judaism in the time of Jesus. So there's lots and lots of things to talk about, like cultural practices? When did they start collectively observing the Torah? So there was a lot of things, but one of the things that we chatted about and actually ended up doing one of our assignments on, I chose to do my assignment on, was anti-Judaism up to the end of the first century. It was a very wide topic, but it had an amazing track record throughout the histories,
In terms of like being documented, is that what you mean?
Yes, in terms of being documented, yeah.
All right.
So that's what caught my interest, was how much writing there was on it. I was like, oh, yeah, I want to talk about it too.
That's awesome.
Let's follow this line.
Yeah. Well, so how do you say it? Is it anti-Judaism or
Anti-Judaism, yeah.
Anti-Judaism.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before until you sent me, the paper that you were working on. I've only ever heard of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Is there a difference?
Yeah.
Okay, so please explain because I still don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think everybody knows anti-Semitism, right? Like, it conjures images of World War II. So anti-Semitism is a term that was coined during the 18th century with the rise of Darwin's racial theory. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So
thanks, Charles. No.
Yeah. Right. So yes, that's where it began. And it kind of placed people like racial groups into tiers of perfection.
Oh gosh.
We here in World War II, blonde hair, blue eyes, that's pinnacle Aryan race. So that's where they got their idea from. It evolved, like, it wasn't as nasty as, like, when Darwin sort of brought the idea up, he didn't have what the Nazis had in mind with it. Although he thought it was kind of began quite as an innocent thing. Unfortunately, at the time, there was a lot of anti-Jewish prejudice already going on.
Oh, okay.
So an anti-Jewish prejudice is basically against the religion and cultural practices.
Okay.
But anti-Semitism is ethnic.
Oh, okay.
So, World War II, you have images of Jewish people with quite large noses. They're quite short.
This is like the caricatures, caricatures that would be around at the day, like as an insult.
Yeah, as an insult. So So to summarise, anti-Semitism is ethnic discrimination against the people group. Anti-Judaism is against culture, practices, and religion.
Okay, and I suppose they could verge as well.
They often do. Yeah. I mean, we see that a lot during World War II. Again, I'm just going to keep talking about it because that's probably the best example.
Yeah.
Yes, they were considered an inferior race and needed to go, but because of their cultural practices, which could have sort of put them on the outside of society, they were seen as like quite quirky, quite strange and weird, and like they're just so not us. We can't identify with them. So that was kind of their overlap there, is like this ethnic group that is just not of us, and they're weird.
Yeah.
So that's and we see that also going back to the BCs and ADs, we see that a lot, and we'll talk about it as we go along. But it comes up quite frequently. Okay. Yeah.
Well, before we go kind of any further, maybe we should just put it out there for anyone who's watching. Obviously, I don't know exactly when this is going to be released and what is going to be happening in the world, but this episode here, what we're talking about is a historical look. It's nothing to do with kind of what necessarily is happening at the moment. Obviously, there's a massive conflict happening in Israel and Palestine and in that kind of area, and we're not here to kind of say, yay, Jewish people are the best. No one is the best. Everyone involved in that conflict is an image bearer of God and has complete 100% value in the eyes of the Lord and in the eyes of us who are Christians and have faith in Jesus. We're just here to talk about what has happened in the past. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, like the things that I'll be bringing up, I'll be strictly talking about up to the end of the 1st century AD with those facts and statistics in mind. And if it becomes relevant to talk about today, I'll make sure to note that. But everything that I have researched is about that era and not today. And I'm not trying to, I'm not ignoring what's happening. I'm not trying to deliberately steer away from it. This is just my area of research and what we'll be talking about today. Yeah.
Awesome. Anti-Judaism, has that always existed, or does it have like a particular genesis?
Yeah. So as far as we can tell, we can date it back to around about 600 BC. It's the very earliest. Before then, there's no evidence about anti-Judaism because at that point, their cultural group was still kind of emerging from the melting pot that is the ancient Middle East, ancient Mesopotamia. So the earliest bits that we get can actually be positive reviews. There's a lot of evidence of trade between Judeans and the wider Mesopotamian Mediterranean area. So and business with them was good. So that's the kind of reviews that we get earliest about the Judean people. But then we get this interesting interaction between the Jews at a place called Elephantine and the local population there with the temple priests. So
is this like a pagan temple?
Yeah, so so a bit of background. Elephantine is an island in the middle of the Nile. It used to be a military base, and eventually it wasn't needed to be used for any sort of military reasons. Yeah, it was just decommissioned. And then we have a Jewish population that lived there. We have a massive amount of artifacts from the Jewish people who lived there, which is not common. So they also have a lot of manuscripts about them having a full thriving life there, interacting with the Egyptians, having good relationships, good trade again. But then we have an issue with
this is Egyptian people.
Yes.
That they on this island, as well as Jewish people living alongside of them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So they live together. So with the Jewish people and the Egyptian people on the island, fantastic relationship. Not so great between the temple priests.
Okay. So like the pagan temple priests and the Jewish temple priests?
Yeah. So we have a temple of Yahweh there, but it's spelt slightly different. So there is some debate about whether or not it was like our God Yahweh or a different one, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't. So evidence scholars sort of go, it is definitely a Yahwehistic temple. Okay. So there was that temple, and right next door we have the Egyptian temple to the ram-headed god Khnum.
Oh wow!
So no issues there initially, but then Passover comes over.
Yes.
Okay. So,
which is a massive Jewish holiday.
Yeah. I'm gonna quiz you now.
Okay.
So with the temple of Khnum next door and them celebrating Passover, can you see where some of the tensions might rise?
Khnum, what was the god?
Ram-headed god.
Okay. Well, Passover, obviously the lamb, that's where the conflict came from.
Yeah, well, it definitely had a lot to do with lamb.
Yeah. Wow.
One is Passover festival, you have a lamb for your meat. So imagine you're worshipping your ram-headed god and you just get the smell of lamb.
Oh, okay.
So that was sacrilegious to them.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, they're not doing it intentionally. They're not trying to insult their neighbours. But it's just cultural and religious clash.
Yeah.
Point one for conflict.
Wow.
The other thing is, what is Passover celebrating?
Oh, leaving Egypt. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Being free from slavery out of Egypt.
Yeah.
Okay, and they are Egyptian.
And
so, oh, okay.
And
massive.
How they would phrase it is the defeat of the Egyptian gods.
True, yes.
So that's quite a very bold festival to be celebrating right next door to another temple.
True.
Obviously cultural clashes would arise anyway, but if that Egyptian temple wasn't their neighbours, I don't know if we'd be having the issues that they had.
So what kind of went down?
They set fire to the temple of Yahweh.
Oh, the Egyptians did? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
So it didn't end great. I believe that they remained after there anyway, and there's letters actually from the Jewish priests to Israel asking for money to rebuild their temple. They never got an answer though, because mainland Israel, so Jeremiah is probably your main voice accusing people of worshipping in temples outside of Israel.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's that sentiment there in like mainland Israel. There's only one temple.
Why are you worshipping at this temple? You should be worshipping in Jerusalem.
Yeah, so there's some debate whether or not Jeremiah is directly prophesying against Elephantine. But yeah, like, I don't know if you can prove it, but like it would be interesting if it was.
And it's interesting too because that would have been such a hurdle way for the religion. Like we have to go to Jerusalem to worship at the temple or to sacrifice at the temple, and already pointing to Jesus, you know, the need to be able to worship wherever you are at. And okay.
I mean, that was kind of their hope anyway, because when you went to the temple, you had to pay a tax. So,
pay a tax, bring a sacrifice, or buy a sacrifice when you got there. That probably wasn't cheap.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
And do it yearly.
And so these guys were like, oh, we'll just make our own temple.
And I mean,
and then it gets burned.
And because Torah observance in Elephantine wasn't as intense as it was in Israel, and so no, the temple never got rebuilt after that.
And so that was kind of the start of the anti-Judaism sentiment.
It is one of the very major beginnings.
Okay. So what is kind of like the communication that's happening from the Egyptian side? What are they kind of saying about the Jewish people at the time?
Well, this is where we get this man called Manetho come in. And he is an Egyptian scholar. As far as we can tell, we don't know an awful lot about him because none of his writings are preserved. It's all preserved through Josephus. So as far as we can tell, he is this man who was an Egyptian scholar and was very against, Jewish people in general. There's a bit of a backstory to it. So have you heard of Akhenaten?
Is that another god?
Well, I mean, he'd probably proclaim himself a god, but he was a Egyptian pharaoh.
Oh, okay.
And
no, then I haven't. No.
So he was a whack job by all accounts, according to the Egyptian people, because you got a major pantheon of gods, right? Akhenaten decided that when he became pharaoh that he was going to get rid of all those gods and just worship the one sun disk. And so he relocated the capital into the middle of a desert where there was no buildings, no water, no food, and he decided, we're going to worship monotheistic religion here, and none of you have a choice about it.
And it's a sun god.
And so he was, after he had passed away, obviously everyone went back to their previous way of worshipping. The whole project was a disaster, died of famine. It was just, it did not go down well, and he was labelled as the heretic king. Manetho claims that Jewish people were actually descendants of his priesthood, because they also worship a monotheistic god.
So they're like connecting the Jewish people to this crazy guy.
And this is all propaganda. This is where anti-Jewish propaganda became.
This is like the first instance of it.
Yes.
Wow.
And he claims that they were never freed from Egypt. They were kicked out because they had diseases.
So this is another propagandistic kind of like way just to like soil their reputation.
He really went in on them. And so this is where Josephus is quoted as saying, the Egyptians began to slander against us. And this is where he talks about Manetho. And there was quite a bit that he said, and this is, I'm summarizing quite a bit because he went in hard about the propaganda. But he basically accused the Jewish population of not really ever having an exodus. They got kicked out because they were lepidus and they were disgusting, dirty people.
And I suppose it's an embarrassing point for the Egyptian people to say, okay, you guys were freed because your God defeated our gods. So that, to brush over that, they put this.
And I mean, this is totally speculation about whether or not did he actually say these things verbatim. But I think what we can be sure of that Josephus is talking about is this general collective sentiment. And these were probably stereotypes that were going around, regardless of if there was this man, Manetho, saying it or not. So it's definitely a cultural consensus about the Jewish people.
All right. And you mentioned Josephus. So I know a little bit about him, but maybe for people who have not done any kind of historical extra biblical reading, who is Josephus?
Oh man, Josephus. He is, I love reading his works because he's got some great stuff. So, points for Christians because he talks about Jesus and he is a secular Jewish historian. So he wasn't always a historian. He was actually a general in the Jewish revolt in about 70 AD. So before the destruction of the temple, he was leading the Jewish revolts with a couple of other blokes.
Against the Romans?
Against the Romans, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And he, obviously it wasn't going well because he defected to the side of the Romans.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so
and he kind of pledged allegiance to Rome and said, look, I'm not only a general, I'm a scholar.
Okay.
So to bridge...
Keep me around.
Yeah,
Don't
I've
kill
got
me.
you. So
Yeah,
please
yeah.
don't chop me off. So he went about... So he's got a series of writings. So his first one was the histories of the Jewish people, antiquities of the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole aim was to bridge the gap between Jewish and Roman relations. So he kind of explained a lot of Jewish practices in a Roman way.
Okay.
Because he was trying to get them to, create a relationship. They just had a civil war, and well, it wasn't really a civil war, was it? It was just a revolt.
Mm-hmm.
So he was trying to bridge those relationships again and heal and mend where he could. And because some of the stuff he talks about, he addresses a lot of the anti-Jewish sentiments. But in a lot of Hellenistic historians' writings, they make fun of Jewish people for not eating pork because it is one of their main meats.
Okay. So, sorry, for people who don't know Hellenistic, what is that?
So it's like Greco-Roman. So when I mention Hellenistic, you can think of just Greek and Roman.
Okay.
Yeah, ancient Greek.
So the Hellenistic people, they would eat pork a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of Hellenistic writers make fun of them for it. Like, they don't eat pork.
Yeah.
Like, what are they eating?
I find it kind of funny that this is in writing,
Yeah,
like
I
that this
know.
is something that's been recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems odd.
And
but
you think like
yeah.
ancient historians, you think quite prestigious, like quite.
Yeah, why would they insult or degrade another
and
race?
they just went ham.
Wow.
Well, just excuse the pun.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
They just went in on them about a lot of their practices, and a couple instances are recorded about when Israel was being conquered. One of the tragic things that happened was women were forced to eat pork or be killed.
Really?
Yeah, so there's some unfortunate accounts of they're trying to degrade them.
Oh.
So, yeah, there were women that were forced to eat pork or die, and a lot of them chose to die.
Wow.
And this is where we get a lot of quite hard historical accounts, because it's not only that, but we also have when the Seleucid Empire takes over the Maccabean kingdom. So after exile, they return and they set up their new Jewish kingdom under the Maccabees. When that fell, the Seleucid Empire came in and they sacrificed a pig on the altar in the temple of God.
Yeah.
And so that was all done because they knew that it was sacrilegious to Jewish people. Yeah.
So just purposely trying to...
Yeah. And this is what Josephus records as well. So, and it's not just in Josephus. It's in Tacitus as well, who is a Roman historian. So, yeah, there's quite a lot of tragic accounts of what happened there. Yeah. And they all thought it was hilarious.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Apart from Josephus, obviously. But
I'm like thinking about all of this, and it just makes me think of Christianity as well, in a way. Like people... I don't know, this is kind of random and off topic, but like when we listen to movies and stuff like that, what is like the top swear word? Like, oh my God, or Jesus Christ, but not in a honoring way.
Yeah.
And like people will say that and it just means nothing. But that's like it's actually offensive to Christians a lot, but it's kind of like a joke, or it's like a cool thing to say. If like you're a cool kid, you'll use that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right, that was part 1 of our chat with Siyanna Waru. Make sure you check back next week for part 2, as Siyanna shares with us how Christians were one of the major perpetrators of anti-Judaism in the past. And we ask the question of whether Christians should support Israel no matter what. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Outside of Sunday podcast. I'll catch you next time. Congrats, you made it to the end of this episode of the Outside of Sunday podcast. Thanks for the support. Become an official outsider by liking and subscribing and leaving a 5-star review. You can connect with me on Instagram or Facebook. Just search Outside of Sunday podcast, and don't forget to let someone you know about this podcast.